Dexter Morgan, Miami's most beloved blood spatter analyst by day and chilling vigilante by night. For 8 seasons, fans of Dexter were captivated by the show's suspense, mystery, and complex characters. But what if one of Dexter's darkest secrets wasn't as safe as he thought? In this video, we'll explore the hidden truth behind Detective Joey Quinn and his suspicions about Dexter.
This is over.
Could he have known more than he ever let on? Let's dive into this theory and unravel the clues. Detective Joey Quinn was never one to sit back and accept things at face value. From the moment he joined Miami Metro Homicide, it was clear that his instincts and sharp observational skills made him a natural investigator. While some of his colleagues were content to follow the evidence as it presented itself, Quinn had a knack for digging deeper, sometimes venturing into uncomfortable territory. This trait set him apart, and over time, it also became evident that he had a particular interest in one of his co-workers, Dexter Morgan. Dexter was, on the surface, unassuming. A brilliant blood spatter analyst who was socially awkward and perpetually mild-mannered. He seemed like the last person anyone would suspect of having a dark secret. Most of his colleagues dismissed his quirks as harmless eccentricities, but Quinn? He wasn't so sure. From early on, something about Dexter seemed off to him. It wasn't just the awkwardness or the occasional inappropriate jokes. It was something deeper, a sense that Dexter was hiding something significant. And Quinn, with his instinct for sniffing out the truth, couldn't help but feel drawn to uncovering whatever it was. What made Quinn's suspicion unique was that it didn't stem from any one specific incident. Rather, it was a series of subtle red flags that began to add up in his mind. For instance, Dexter's uncanny ability to get into the minds of killers often struck Quinn as unnatural.
Didn't give me a chance to intercept her. It doesn't make sense. Unless she wants me here so she can hurt me some other way.
While others marveled at Dexter's insights, Quinn sometimes wondered if Dexter's expertise was a little too good to be true. How could one man so consistently anticipate the actions of Miami's most dangerous criminals? It was almost as if Dexter had more than just a professional understanding of their minds. Almost as if he shared their perspective. Quinn's curiosity deepened as he observed Dexter's behavior in social settings. While everyone at Miami Metro had their quirks, Dexter's were particularly pronounced.
Sure, I guess. We'll be there all afternoon.
He was often detached, rarely forming genuine connections with anyone other than his sister, Deborah Morgan. Even with her, his interactions sometimes felt strangely calculated, as if he was performing the role of a caring brother, rather than genuinely embodying it. This performative quality didn't sit well with Quinn. He had spent enough time around liars and criminals to recognize when someone was putting on a facade. And with Dexter, the mask was always firmly in place. Then there were Dexter's uncanny disappearances. Time and again, Quinn noticed that Dexter had a habit of vanishing during key moments in cases. Whether it was during tense manhunts or crucial investigative breakthroughs, Dexter always seemed to have an excuse for why he wasn't present. Most people chalked it up to his lab responsibilities, but Quinn wasn't so easily convinced. The timing of these absences often struck him as suspicious, as if Dexter was deliberately avoiding certain situations. While Quinn couldn't prove anything, these moments added fuel to the fire of his growing suspicion.
Knowing some details about your brother's life helped me make sense out of his death.
What truly began to solidify Quinn's unease, however, was Dexter's connection to the cases themselves. Time and again, Quinn noticed that the killers Miami Metro pursued often had some sort of indirect link to Dexter. From the ice truck killer, whose connection to Dexter turned out to be disturbingly personal, to the Trinity killer and beyond, Dexter seemed to have a knack for being in the orbit of Miami's most infamous murderers. While others attributed this to coincidence or sheer bad luck, Quinn wasn't so sure. To him, it felt more like a pattern, and patterns didn't lie. As Quinn's unease grew, he began to test the waters, subtly probing Dexter in casual conversations. These interactions, however, only left him more perplexed. Dexter was a master at deflection, always steering conversations away from himself with disarming humor or feigned awkwardness. For most people, this tactic worked perfectly, but Quinn wasn't most people. He could sense that behind Dexter's affable exterior was a man who was always calculating, always measuring his words and actions. This level of control struck Quinn as unnatural, even for someone as meticulous as Dexter. Complicating matters further was Quinn's evolving relationship with Deborah. As he grew closer to her, his suspicions about Dexter became a source of internal conflict. On one hand, he cared deeply for Deborah and didn't want to jeopardize their relationship by voicing his concerns about her brother. On the other hand, his instincts as a detective wouldn't let him ignore the nagging feeling that Dexter was hiding something. This tension created a push and pull dynamic within Quinn, as he wrestled with the implications of his suspicions. Through it all, Quinn couldn't shake the feeling that Dexter was more than just an oddball coworker. The small inconsistencies, the strange behavior, the convenient absences, it all pointed to something larger, something darker. But what? Quinn didn't have the evidence to back up his gut feeling, and without concrete proof, he knew he couldn't act on his suspicions.
I wasn't sure until you were.
Still, the seeds of doubt had been planted, and as time went on, they would only grow. What began as a vague sense of unease was slowly evolving into a full-blown obsession. And Quinn, whether he realized it or not, was inching closer to uncovering a truth that could change everything. When Lumen Pierce entered Dexter's life during the events of Season 5, it marked a pivotal moment, not only for Dexter, but also for those who surrounded him at Miami Metro, including Detective Joey Quinn. Lumen was unlike anyone Dexter had encountered before. A kindred spirit who had endured unimaginable trauma at the hands of the Barrel Girl gang and sought justice, or perhaps vengeance, for what had been done to her. What unfolded between Dexter and Lumen was an intense and deeply personal partnership, one that didn't escape Quinn's ever-watchful eye. At first, Lumen's sudden appearance in Dexter's life seemed innocuous enough. To most of the department, she was just another figure in Dexter's private world, someone who had entered the orbit of the seemingly quiet and reserved bloodspatter analyst. But Quinn had already begun to view Dexter through a lens of suspicion, and Lumen's presence only deepened his curiosity. The timing, for one, seemed too coincidental. Lumen had appeared during the height of the Barrel Girl investigation, an emotionally charged and highly publicized case that had everyone in Miami Metro on edge. For Quinn, it was difficult to ignore the strange parallel between the department's efforts to track the killers and Dexter's unusual behavior during the same period. Quinn's suspicions were further piqued by Dexter's protectiveness over Lumen. He seemed uncharacteristically involved in her life, going out of his way to shield her from questions and scrutiny. While most of the department assumed Lumen was just another lost soul seeking solace after a traumatic experience, Quinn wasn't convinced. The intensity of their connection didn't align with the Dexter Morgan he thought he knew. Dexter had always been distant, even with his family and colleagues. Yet with Lumen, there was a sense of urgency, a drive to keep her safe at all costs. This behavior raised a red flag for Quinn, who couldn't help but wonder if Dexter's relationship with Lumen was rooted in something far more sinister. One of the most telling moments for Quinn came during the investigation into the Barrel Girl gang. Miami Metro was working tirelessly to track down the perpetrators of these heinous crimes, yet Dexter always seemed one step ahead. It wasn't just that he had a knack for uncovering critical evidence, it was the way he approached the case. While others on the team were methodically piecing together clues, Dexter appeared to have an almost preternatural understanding of the killer's motivations and movements. This uncanny insight didn't sit well with Quinn, who started to believe that Dexter wasn't just following the evidence, but was somehow directly involved. Lumen's connection to the Barrel Girl case only added to the mystery. As the department closed in on key suspects, Quinn began to notice a pattern. Lumen often disappeared from the spotlight at critical moments, only to re-emerge once the dust had settled. This struck him as strange, given her role as a victim and a potential witness. Why wasn't she cooperating more fully with the investigation? And why did Dexter seem so determined to keep her at arm's length from Miami Metro? These questions gnawed at Quinn, who couldn't shake the feeling that Dexter and Lumen were hiding something. Adding to Quinn's growing unease was the undeniable chemistry between Dexter and Lumen. While most of their colleagues dismissed their relationship as a bond forged through shared trauma, Quinn saw something deeper, something darker. It wasn't just that they were close, it was the way they seemed to understand each other on a level that went beyond words. Their interactions were marked by a sense of urgency and purpose, as if they were working together toward a shared goal. To Quinn, it almost felt like they were partners in something far more dangerous than anyone realized. Quinn's suspicions reached a boiling point when Miami Metro finally dismantled the Barrel Girl gang. The department celebrated the successful resolution of a gruesome case, but Quinn couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The official story tied up all the loose ends neatly, but there were inconsistencies that gnawed at him. How had Dexter managed to be so instrumental in connecting the dots? And why did Lumen suddenly vanish from Dexter's life the moment the case was closed? These questions kept Quinn awake at night, replaying the events in his mind and searching for answers that eluded him. What frustrated Quinn the most was his inability to act on his suspicions. Without concrete evidence, he couldn't confront Dexter directly, and his colleagues at Miami Metro would never take his concerns seriously. After all, Dexter was a valued member of the team, a man who had repeatedly proven his worth through his forensic expertise. To accuse him of wrongdoing without proof would not only jeopardize Quinn's career, but also risk alienating those closest to him, particularly Deborah Morgan. Still, Quinn couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that Dexter and Lumen had been involved in something far beyond the scope of the official investigation. He began to wonder if Dexter's connection to Lumen was the key to uncovering the truth about Dexter himself. Was Lumen just another victim Dexter had taken under his wing? Or was she a window into the dark secret Quinn had long suspected Dexter was hiding? These questions lingered long after the Barrel Girl case was closed, leaving Quinn with an uneasy sense that the story wasn't over. In the end, Lumen's presence in Dexter's life served as a catalyst for Quinn's growing suspicions. Her sudden appearance, her connection to the case, and her inexplicable bond with Dexter all pointed to something far more complex than anyone at Miami Metro realized. For Quinn, the events surrounding Lumen Pierce were more than just a chapter in Dexter's life. They were a clue, a piece of the puzzle that might one day reveal the truth about who Dexter Morgan really was. And while Quinn couldn't yet see the full picture, he was closer than he had ever been to uncovering the secret that Dexter had worked so hard to keep hidden. Detective Joey Quinn's curiosity about Dexter Morgan had been simmering for quite some time, but it was during the events of Season 5 that his suspicions crystallized into something more concrete. Unlike many of his colleagues at Miami Metro, Quinn wasn't content to write off Dexter's strange behavior as mere eccentricity. He'd seen enough shady characters in his career to recognize when someone was hiding something, and Dexter's demeanor, his calculated detachment, and his tendency to be in the orbit of major criminal cases without ever fully explaining his role, all pointed to something worth investigating. It started as a quiet observation. Dexter had always been an enigma, a blood spatter analyst who managed to stay on the periphery of most social interactions. yet somehow always found himself at the center of the most pivotal cases. Quinn began to notice patterns in Dexter's behavior that others seemed to overlook. His uncanny ability to anticipate a killer's moves, his frequent absences during critical moments in investigations, and his tendency to appear calm in situations that would rattle most people. All of it gnawed at Quinn. These observations fueled his growing belief that Dexter wasn't just an ordinary forensic scientist. He was something more, and whatever it was, Quinn was determined to find out. What pushed Quinn over the edge was Dexter's connection to Lumen Pierce and the Barrel Girl case. While everyone else at Miami Metro saw Dexter as a loyal and hardworking colleague, Quinn saw a man whose involvement in the case went far beyond the boundaries of his professional duties. Dexter's protectiveness over Lumen and his insistence on keeping her away from the department struck Quinn as deeply suspicious. Why was Dexter so invested in her safety? Why did he go out of his way to shield her from scrutiny? And why did it seem like Dexter and Lumen were working on their own agenda, separate from the official investigation? These questions drove Quinn to take action. Lacking any substantial evidence to justify an internal investigation, Quinn decided to take matters into his own hands. He reached out to someone who could help him dig deeper into Dexter's life without raising suspicion: Stan Liddy. Liddy was a disgraced cop, someone with nothing to lose and everything to gain from taking on a high-stakes, off-the-books investigation. He was exactly the kind of person Quinn needed to uncover the truth. With Liddy's help, Quinn began a shadow investigation into Dexter, hoping to find the missing pieces that would validate his suspicions. At first, the investigation seemed promising. Liddy was resourceful and unafraid to bend the rules, which allowed him to gather information that Quinn couldn't access through official channels. Liddy's surveillance of Dexter revealed a pattern of strange behavior: late-night trips to unknown locations, secretive meetings, and unexplained absences from work. These findings only deepened Quinn's belief that Dexter was hiding something big. However, as the investigation progressed, Quinn began to feel a growing sense of unease. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but he knew that whatever he found could have far-reaching consequences, not just for Dexter, but for the entire department. Liddy's obsession with the case soon became a problem. Unlike Quinn, who was motivated by a mix of professional suspicion and personal curiosity, Liddy saw the investigation as an opportunity to redeem himself and climb back into the good graces of the department. This difference in motivation created tension between the two men. Quinn wanted to approach the investigation cautiously, ensuring that they didn't tip their hand too soon, but Liddy was more aggressive, pushing for immediate action. He began to take risks that made Quinn increasingly uncomfortable, such as planting surveillance equipment and tailing Dexter without Quinn's approval. As Liddy's methods grew more reckless, Quinn started to question whether he had made a mistake by involving him in the first place. While Quinn wanted to uncover the truth about Dexter, he wasn't prepared to cross certain ethical lines to do so. Liddy, on the other hand, had no such reservations. His determination to expose Dexter led him to accumulate a trove of potentially incriminating evidence: photos, audio recordings, and video surveillance that painted a troubling picture of Dexter's activities. But for Quinn, this evidence wasn't enough. It raised more questions than it answered, and without a clear understanding of what Dexter was really up to, Quinn wasn't ready to make a move. Things came to a head when Liddy took matters into his own hands. Convinced that he had enough evidence to expose Dexter, Liddy planned to confront him directly. Quinn, who was beginning to feel conflicted about the entire investigation, tried to dissuade Liddy from taking such drastic action. But Liddy was too far gone, blinded by his desire for redemption and recognition. He ignored Quinn's warnings and set a trap for Dexter, believing that he could force him to confess or catch him in the act of doing something illegal. Liddy's plan backfired spectacularly. Dexter, ever the master manipulator, turned the tables on Liddy and eliminated him before he could reveal anything. When Quinn learned of Liddy's death, he was devastated. Not only had he lost a valuable ally in the investigation, but he also realized that he was now in over his head. Liddy's death was officially ruled a homicide, and Quinn knew that if anyone found out about his involvement in the investigation, his career, and possibly his life would be in jeopardy. The fallout from Liddy's death forced Quinn to reassess his approach. He couldn't prove that Dexter had killed Liddy, but he was certain that Dexter had played a role in his demise. At the same time, he began to question his own motivations. Why had he been so fixated on uncovering Dexter's secret? Was it because he truly believed that Dexter was a threat? Or was it something more personal? His growing feelings for Deborah Morgan only complicated matters. If Dexter really was the monster Quinn suspected him to be, how could he expose the truth without destroying Deborah in the process? In the end, Quinn's investigation into Dexter left him with more questions than answers. He was closer than ever to uncovering the truth, but he also realized the cost of pursuing it. Liddy's death served as a stark reminder of the dangers involved, and Quinn began to wonder if it was worth continuing. While his suspicions about Dexter remained, he chose to pull back, at least for the time being. But the shadow of what he had uncovered lingered, haunting him and leaving him with the unsettling feeling that Dexter Morgan was far more dangerous than anyone at Miami Metro realized. Joey Quinn's relationship with Deborah Morgan was a significant turning point in his life, and it deeply influenced how he navigated his growing suspicions about her brother, Dexter. From the moment Quinn and Deborah's paths crossed, it was clear that their dynamic was layered with tension, affection, and a mutual respect for each other's abilities as detectives. But as their connection evolved into a romantic relationship, Quinn found himself in a complicated position. His instincts as a cop told him something was off about Dexter, but his feelings for Deborah forced him to tread carefully. He wasn't just investigating a coworker anymore. He was questioning the integrity of someone Deborah cared about deeply, and that made every decision far more personal. Deborah was fiercely loyal to her brother, a fact that Quinn couldn't ignore. Her unwavering belief in Dexter as a good and dependable man was evident in nearly every conversation she had about him. She often spoke of him with pride, recounting his dedication to his job and his steadfast support for her through tough times. To Deborah, Dexter wasn't just her brother. He was her rock, the one person she could always rely on. This admiration made it almost impossible for Quinn to voice his concerns about Dexter without risking their relationship. How could he tell the woman he cared about that the person she trusted most might be hiding something terrible? This inner conflict created a constant push and pull dynamic for Quinn. On one hand, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Dexter wasn't who he appeared to be. On the other hand, he didn't want to hurt Deborah or jeopardize their relationship by pursuing his suspicions too aggressively. This struggle became even more pronounced as Quinn and Deborah grew closer. The deeper their relationship became, the harder it was for Quinn to imagine a scenario where exposing Dexter wouldn't have devastating consequences for her. One of the most challenging aspects of this situation for Quinn was the realization that Deborah's love for Dexter was deeply intertwined with her own sense of identity. She had spent her entire life striving to live up to what she believed were her father's expectations, and Dexter had always been part of that narrative. Harry Morgan, their father, had trained Dexter to channel his dark urges into something productive, and Deborah had inherited that same drive to do good in the world. For her, Dexter wasn't just her brother. He was a symbol of her family's legacy. To suggest that he might be anything less than the man she believed him to be would be to challenge everything she held dear. Quinn often found himself wrestling with how much to reveal about his suspicions. He knew that if he came to Deborah with half-baked theories or vague concerns, she would dismiss him outright. But even if he had solid evidence, the fallout would be catastrophic. Deborah wasn't the type to take accusations against her brother lightly, and Quinn feared that any attempt to expose Dexter would not only destroy their relationship, but also shatter Deborah's trust in him forever. This fear paralyzed him, leaving him stuck in a cycle of doubt and indecision. The situation reached a boiling point when Quinn's off-the-books investigation into Dexter, led by Stan Liddy, started to yield results. While Quinn kept most of the details to himself, he couldn't entirely hide his unease from Deborah. She noticed his distracted demeanor and began to question why he seemed so preoccupied. At times, Quinn considered coming clean to her, but the thought of how she might react always stopped him. He knew that if he revealed what he was doing, it would force Deborah to choose between her loyalty to her brother and her trust in him. And Quinn wasn't sure he wanted to know which side she would pick. Complicating matters further was the fact that Quinn genuinely cared about Deborah's well-being. He had seen how much pain she had endured over the years, losing her father, struggling to prove herself in a male-dominated profession, and enduring heartbreak after heartbreak. The last thing he wanted was to add to her burden by dragging her into a web of suspicion and betrayal. Yet every time he looked at Dexter, he couldn't help but wonder if he was protecting Deborah from a truth she deserved to know. Quinn's protective instincts often clashed with his sense of duty as a detective. He had built his career on following the evidence wherever it led, but in this case, the stakes felt too high. If he pursued the truth about Dexter, he risked losing not just his relationship with Deborah, but also his place in the department. Miami Metro was more than just a workplace. It was a family, and accusing one of their own without irrefutable proof could irreparably damage his standing with his colleagues. As time went on, Quinn began to justify his silence as an act of love. He told himself that he was protecting Deborah by keeping his suspicions to himself, sparing her the pain of discovering that her brother might not be the man she thought he was. But deep down, he knew that this decision wasn't entirely selfless. By staying silent, he was also protecting himself, shielding himself from the fallout that would inevitably come if he confronted Dexter head-on. The emotional toll of this conflict weighed heavily on Quinn. He found himself withdrawing from Deborah at times, unable to reconcile his growing suspicions with his desire to build a future with her. Their relationship, once filled with passion and mutual understanding, began to show cracks as Quinn's internal struggle intensified. Deborah, ever perceptive, sensed that something was wrong, but couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. She attributed Quinn's behavior to the stress of the job, never suspecting that his turmoil stemmed from doubts about the person she loved most. For Quinn, the question of what to do about Dexter remained unresolved. Every instinct in his body told him that something wasn't right, but his heart wouldn't let him take the next step. He was trapped in a moral quandary, torn between his duty as a detective and his loyalty to the woman he loved. And as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, Quinn realized that the choice he faced wasn't just about exposing Dexter. It was about deciding what kind of man he wanted to be. As the events of Dexter unfolded, Detective Joey Quinn's suspicions about Dexter Morgan never fully dissipated, even after his investigation hit a dead end. With Stan Liddy's death and no concrete evidence to tie Dexter to any wrongdoing, Quinn was left in a limbo of unanswered questions and unresolved feelings. Despite the barriers, he couldn't shake the lingering sense that Dexter was far from the harmless blood spatter analyst he pretended to be. Over time, this suspicion grew into a quiet, haunting certainty, one that he couldn't prove but also couldn't ignore. Quinn had always trusted his gut, and his instincts told him that Dexter was hiding something dark, perhaps even monstrous. There were too many unanswered questions, too many coincidences surrounding Dexter's life, and his uncanny ability to intersect with Miami's most dangerous killers. The oddities were glaring to Quinn: Dexter's frequent absences during high-stakes cases, his unrelenting calm in the face of chaos, and his peculiar ability to predict a killer's next move. These behaviors, combined with Dexter's connections to key figures like Lumen Pierce and Hannah McKay, painted a picture that was too disturbing to dismiss entirely. Quinn's suspicions about Dexter were complicated by the passage of time and the lack of actionable proof. While other detectives might have moved on, Quinn found himself replaying past events in his mind, searching for the missing pieces. He thought about the ice truck killer case, the Trinity killer's connection to Dexter's family, and even smaller cases where Dexter always seemed to be just one step ahead. Each time, the evidence wasn't enough to draw any concrete conclusions, but the pattern was unmistakable. Dexter was always there, somehow involved in ways that defied explanation. One moment that stuck with Quinn was how seamlessly Dexter navigated the chaos surrounding Rita's death. Most people would have been shattered by the loss of a spouse, especially in such a violent and public manner. But Dexter? He grieved in a way that felt performative, almost mechanical. To Quinn, it seemed as if Dexter wasn't mourning the loss of a loved one, but rather processing an inconvenient disruption to his carefully managed life. This detached reaction only added to Quinn's unease, reinforcing the idea that Dexter's emotions, his entire personality even, were carefully curated to keep people at arm's length. Over time, Quinn began to adopt a more passive approach to his suspicions. He didn't have the resources or the evidence to launch another investigation, especially not without Liddy's help. But that didn't mean he stopped paying attention. In fact, his strategy shifted to one of quiet observation. He watched Dexter more closely than ever, studying his behavior during investigations, scrutinizing his interactions with others, and noting every instance where Dexter's actions didn't quite align with his words. It was as if Quinn was collecting mental notes, waiting for the day when Dexter might slip up and reveal something he couldn't cover up. Quinn's decision to remain silent wasn't just about self-preservation. It was also about Deborah. As much as he wanted to know the truth about Dexter, he couldn't bring himself to pursue it at the expense of Deborah's happiness. She had been through so much already: personal losses, professional challenges, and her own tangled relationship with Dexter. To expose Dexter would have been to destroy her world, and Quinn wasn't sure he could live with himself if he were the cause of that kind of pain. For all his flaws, Quinn truly cared about Deborah, and protecting her became one of the driving forces behind his decision to keep his suspicions to himself. Still, the weight of what he suspected gnawed at him. Quinn wasn't the type to let things go easily, and Dexter's secret, whatever it was, became a ghost that followed him everywhere. He often found himself staring at Dexter during department meetings, studying his every move and wondering how someone could live such a double life without slipping. He began to see Dexter not just as a suspect, but as a psychological enigma, someone who had mastered the art of blending in while hiding in plain sight. The idea both fascinated and unnerved him, leaving Quinn caught in a mental tug-of-war between wanting to dig deeper and wanting to walk away entirely. As the years passed, Quinn's quiet suspicions became a part of him, something he carried but rarely shared. He couldn't talk to Deborah about it, not without destroying their relationship, and he didn't trust anyone else in the department to take his concerns seriously. Dexter had cultivated an image of the perfect coworker, the reliable expert who always came through in the clutch. To accuse him of anything, let alone something as heinous as Quinn suspected, would have been met with skepticism at best, and outright hostility at worst. Quinn wasn't ready to take that risk, especially without hard evidence. In his quieter moments, Quinn wrestled with the moral implications of his inaction. Was he complicit in Dexter's secret by choosing not to pursue it? Did his silence make him culpable in whatever Dexter was hiding? These questions haunted him, and while he couldn't answer them definitively, they left him with a sense of guilt that lingered beneath the surface. He knew that his decision to stay silent wasn't entirely noble. It was motivated as much by self-preservation as it was by a desire to protect Deborah. But he also knew that the truth, if revealed, would cause a ripple effect of destruction that he wasn't sure he wanted to unleash. Even as Quinn struggled with his suspicions, he couldn't help but admire the sheer audacity of Dexter's charade. If Dexter really was what Quinn suspected, a killer operating under the noses of Miami Metro, then he was unlike anyone Quinn had ever encountered. Dexter's ability to evade detection, to manipulate those around him into seeing only what he wanted them to see, was nothing short of extraordinary. Quinn often wondered how Dexter managed it, how he carried the weight of his secret without cracking under the pressure. It was a question that simultaneously terrified and fascinated him, leaving him unsure whether he wanted to uncover the truth or simply leave it buried. In the end, Quinn's suspicions about Dexter remained unresolved. He never found the smoking gun he needed to expose Dexter, and he never confronted him directly about the doubts that plagued him. But the shadow of those suspicions lingered, shaping the way Quinn viewed Dexter and coloring his interactions with him. For Quinn, the question of who Dexter really was became less about finding answers and more about living with uncertainty. And while he might never have uncovered the full extent of Dexter's secret, the lingering suspicion that he knew something no one else did would remain with him forever, a quiet reminder of the danger that often hides in plain sight.